Does science lead to the truth? Is science the only reliable source of knowledge? Scientism is a view that would say yes to these two questions. Merriam-Webster defines scientism as an exaggerated trust in the efficacy of the methods of natural science applied to all the areas of investigation, as in philosophy, the social sciences, and the humanities. I'll make a detailed video explaining why the answer to these two questions cannot be a yes, but a no. But for now, this is what the professor of philosophy, Dr. Mark J Boone, had to say on this topic when I asked him about it.
I've got scientism. You see, these things, they say that science leads to the truth, which is really problematic because I think logic, I don't know if someone would categorize logic as a part of science, which I don't think, because science is all about experimentation and all. Logic is more about intuitiveness, right? It's more about your intuitive, the intuition, right? And I don't think it needs, like, you've got a priori knowledge and a posteriori. And I really think that belief in the soul, the consciousness, it shouldn't even be based on any scientific process. It's very much intuitive. Like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. That's all you need, right?
I think at this point, what I want to say is science might be a part of logic, but not vice versa. But at any rate, science is not the only form of knowledge. And science cannot be the only form of knowledge.
Exactly.
And if it were, then there is no knowledge at all. This is something David Hume was really good at understanding, although he was also foolish enough to think that there was no knowledge, or at least knowledge of a world outside the mind. So Hume says, all knowledge of the world outside my mind must come from experience. But you can't learn anything about the world from experience except by means of some principle that you use to draw conclusions about the world from experience. A principle like the principle of induction, that I can reason about things I have not experienced from what I have, or the principle of the uniformity of nature that says all the same laws of physics are always in place. Without a principle like that, you can't do science. And that principle itself is how we do science, one of those principles. I don't think it has to be both, but it has to be one of those principles at least in place in order for us to do science. It's how we do science, so you don't get it from science. So if we don't know that, then we don't know anything from science. So that's at least one principle that is not known from science, but is known if we know anything from science. And frankly, I think we do know that the Earth orbits the sun and not vice versa. I think we do know electrons exist. Therefore, there is knowledge from science, and therefore there is some knowledge that is not from science. And whatever that knowledge is, however we know that the uniformity of nature is true or that induction works, however we know that might easily be a way we also know about God or soul or morality or any number of other things. And it turns out that the stuff these philosophers and theologians have been talking about all this time is pretty much exactly what we know in those ways. It's like the first principle that you know by common sense, I am thinking, or the common sense principle, my teacup exists and it still exists after it lost a few molecules. These common sense principles are how we know virtually everything we know. And the person who says science is the only way of knowing anything is thereby, well, committing epistemological suicide. He's saying that there's no way of knowing anything at all if he knows what he's talking about. Usually they don't know. Hume did know. Hume had the decency to know this. And the logical positivists did not know this, but Bertrand Russell at least admitted it. Since science has a foundation that cannot be known from science, there must be some knowledge that does not come from science. And if there's not, then science doesn't give us knowledge either. It's a grand exercise in sophisticated ignorance. But if science does give us some knowledge, as I think it does, then the way is clear for knowing some other things, including religion, ethics, and some of those metaphysical principles, like the teacup continues to exist. So the people who say, the people who promote scientism, which we could define as the theory that all knowledge must come from science and only science, the people who promote scientism are deeply confused. Now, of course, I go over this endlessly on my YouTube channel when I talk about Hume. It's in the Philosophers in Their Own Words playlist. It's in some other material. Some of the great modern and contemporary philosophers have been talking about this. Kant and Thomas Reid and Alvin Plantinga have been talking about this in responding to these people who said knowledge comes from science only.
No, I think knowledge comes from the intellect and also from God directly in the form of revelation. I mean, as a religious person, you would admit that.
Yeah,
But
totally.
of course, I mean, atheists don't really have to believe in the revelation part, but at least they have to admit that knowledge apart from science, because science is also an intellectual exercise, right? But something that is more fundamental than that is the intuition, where we know certain things. Like